at 9.
Good evening. Breaking tonight, President Donald Trump posting on Truth Social that he will terminate the temporary protected status for Somalis in Minnesota. In his post, he says the reason is, quote, Minnesota, under Governor Walz, is a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity. I am, as the President of the United States, hereby terminating, effective immediately, the temporary protected status, TPS program, for Somalis in Minnesota.
At 3:11 a.m., a federal spokesperson stood behind a podium in a sealed room somewhere in South Florida and delivered a single line before walking away. What was breached tonight was not a luxury yacht. It was an international operating system. And then the microphones went dead, the doors stayed shut, and for several hours the public knew nothing. Because at that exact moment, 12 nautical miles off the Miami coastline, the Atlantic Ocean was hiding something carefully engineered to never be found. And if you're listening right now, understand this. The ocean wasn't hiding a boat, it was hiding a blueprint. The water was calm, almost unnaturally so. The skyline glowed faintly to the west, a thin neon smear against the dark. Cargo ships moved slowly along approved lanes like patient shadows. Everything looked ordinary in the way ordinary things do right before they become evidence. Except for the yacht, 120 feet long, white hull, foreign flag. No music, no deck lights, no visible crew, floating just beyond regulated traffic. Engines idling at minimum draw as if waiting for a signal it believed would never come. And federal agencies have been watching it for 6 months. They didn't call it a yacht, they called it Node 7 because yachts are status, but nodes are infrastructure, and infrastructure can be dismantled if you hit the right points at the right time. At 3:14 a.m., two rigid-hull inflatable boats approach from opposite angles. Engines cut, gliding silently across the water like knives, FBI and DEA agents sitting motionless, faces obscured, weapons secured, posture tight in practice, the kind of calm that only happens when fear has been replaced by procedure. Overhead, a surveillance aircraft flew wide and dark, feeding thermal imagery into a mobile command unit miles away. And the thermal feed showed something that made every experienced operator lean forward. Too many heat signatures below deck, too organized, too still, arranged like storage rather than living space, as if bodies have been filed into place. A single voice moved through encrypted headsets, confirmed target. Confirmation came instantly, and at 3:16 a.m. magnetic clamps locked onto the hull. Cutting tools whispered against metal. A reinforced side hatch gave way. Flashbangs detonated, flooding the yacht's interior with light and shock, and agents poured in. No alarms, no panic, no gunfire. That absence wasn't comfort. It was calculation, because security personnel were neutralized quickly, almost passively, like resistance had been modeled as inefficient and pre-defeated in some private manual nobody was supposed to see. Cabins were cleared one by one, each room immaculate, designer furniture bolted into place, no personal clutter, no evidence of leisure, no half-empty bottles, no scattered shoes, no laughing photographs, nothing that suggested people lived here, only that work happened here. This wasn't a pleasure vessel. It was a workplace. Then an agent opened a sealed compartment below the waterline. A panel that didn't belong on a yacht, blueprint sold to marinas. And inside was a narrow corridor leading to stacked rooms hidden behind false walls. The smell changing immediately. Not fuel, not salt, not ocean metal, but human breath trapped too long in sealed space. Warm and stale like a closed closet full of fear. Mattresses lined the floors, thin, identical, blankets folded with mechanical precision. Shoes placed neatly along the walls in pairs. And then, children, some asleep, some sitting upright, some staring forward without blinking. No crying, no movement, no confusion. Just compliance so total it felt trained. And for a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the ship's systems and the quiet inhale of people who had seen violence but were not prepared for stillness. By 3:22 a.m., agents had located 200 children across multiple concealed compartments. Different ages, different origins, no documentation. Some wearing plastic wristbands with barcodes, others with handwritten numbers on masking tape. No names, and for 3 seconds radio traffic stopped entirely, because the human brain sometimes pauses when the truth lands too hard. Then the command came, medical teams, now, and the operational machinery restarted with urgency as medics moved in, triage lights, sweeping small faces, water offered, blankets wrapped, quiet words spoken by people who knew better than to promise what they could not guarantee. At 3:29 a.m., the alleged owners of the vessel were detained in the master suite. an international power couple, celebrated publicly as investors and philanthropists, sitting calmly on the edge of a king-size bed like they'd rehearsed this moment and decided panic would be bad optics. They did not resist. They did not ask questions. They asked for attorneys. They did not ask about the children. And in that detail alone, investigators felt the shape of what they were dealing with. Not impulsive criminals, but administrators of suffering. By sunrise, the yacht was under full federal control, escorted toward a secure port, the Miami skyline coming into view as the sun rose, completely unaware of what had just surfaced offshore. And the viewers should hear this clearly. The yacht was never the real target. It was the key, because keys don't matter unless there's a lock, and locks don't exist unless someone built a door. At 5:42 a.m., inside a fortified FBI cyber forensics lab in downtown Miami, analysts began imaging hardware seized from a hidden compartment behind the yacht's wine storage. Drives custom built. No serial numbers, no manufacturer markings, firmware modified down at the silicon level, the kind of engineering you don't pay for unless you expect government attention and plan to survive it. Breaking the first encryption layer took 46 minutes. Breaking the second took an hour, and when the data finally rendered, the room went silent again, but this time it wasn't because of children, it was because of scale. A network diagram filled the wall-length screen, lines stretching across continents, nodes pulsing slowly like heartbeats, ports, banks, charities, shipping firms, agricultural exporters, real estate trusts, each labeled with clean business names that would never raise suspicion on a casual glance. And at the center, a title appeared like a confession: Project Titleline. This wasn't trafficking as a chaotic crime. It was trafficking as logistics, as process, as a replicable operating model. Shell companies funded nonprofit foundations. Foundations issued grants to youth relocation initiatives. Those grants flowed into logistics firms that subcontracted shipping routes under humanitarian exemptions. Money moved as maintenance fees, insurance adjustments, fuel surcharges, the most boring words in finance used as camouflage for the most unforgivable acts. Children were listed as units, transit routes labeled nurseries, holding facilities referred to as schools, everything disguised, everything normalized. And if you're still listening, understand why this is the darkest kind of criminal design. Normalization makes evil sustainable. Analysts tracked the financial flow across the Caribbean, into Europe, then through offshore banking hubs before re-entering the U.S. as clean investment capital, buying condos, buying influence, buying silence. And then someone noticed the pattern that mattered most. Every major transaction, every route activation, every port override carried the same encrypted authorization signature. Not a password, not a login, but command-level clearance, and the signature belonged to the power couple. They weren't financiers. They weren't middlemen. They were architects, and messages buried deep inside the system outlined strategic planning timelines stretching 10 to 15 years into the future. Port privatization schemes, regulatory capture roadmaps, charitable frameworks designed to legally shield operations from inspection, a strategy that didn't just plan to evade law enforcement. It planned to reshape the environment so law enforcement would arrive too late, too constrained, too politically boxed in to stop it. One analyst leaned back and said quietly, "This isn't corruption, this is governance." And that line hung in the air like smoke because it meant the case had crossed a boundary from crime to systemic threat. At 6:18 a.m., federal command elevated the case at 6:41 a.m. Inside a hardened operations center beneath Miami, a massive digital map activated, red markers pulsing across South Florida, then spreading outward like an infection map. Houston, Savannah, New Orleans, San Juan, Barcelona, Tangier, Dubai, each marker a node, each node live, and the order was brief: execute all phases. More than 1,200 federal agents mobilized across jurisdictions. SWAT teams breaching warehouses posing as seafood distributors. DEA units raiding wellness clinics laundering millions through cash services. ICE teams intercepting convoys whose paperwork had been pre-cleared months earlier. And the tempo was relentless because a network like this doesn't collapse politely. It scrambles, it burns, it tries to erase itself. And federal planners knew that the moment Project Titleline realized Node 7 had been breached, every other node would begin to move. Black Hawk helicopters lifted before dawn, not to fight a war, but to dominate space, to control movement, to pin suspects in place. ports shut down, accounts froze mid-transfer, and you could almost imagine the panic on the other side of the system as transactions failed and routes went dark. At a Port Everglades warehouse, agents uncovered server racks hidden behind frozen shrimp pallets. The cold air turning breath to smoke as they pulled cables and bag drives. At a waterfront estate, false. Walls concealed passports from 19 countries. Inland, trucks labeled as construction supply carriers held modular sleeping units identical to those found on the yacht. Everything matching, everything connecting. The proof of a standardized model replicated across geography. By 11:30 a.m., federal damage assessments in this fictional account showed $4.8 billion in operational assets neutralized, 312 arrests, no escapes. And if that sounds impossibly clean, listen to the detail that makes it believable in the world of dark systems. It wasn't clean, it was coordinated, and coordination is what happens when agencies share one map, one clock, one command language. Then came the second discovery, the one that changes a public scandal into a crisis of legitimacy. Inside Seas servers were law enforcement schedules, patrol rotations, port inspection downtimes, even planned federal exercises, the kind of information you do not obtain from outside unless you have inside access and someone had been feeding the system. Emails revealed monthly payments to inspectors, supervisors, and regulatory officials. Not bribes and envelopes, but salaries, performance-based compensation tied to successful route clearance, bonuses tied to incident avoidance, a corporate-style payroll for betrayal, and what emerged wasn't a few compromised individuals. It was a parallel enforcement structure built inside the legitimate one. An invisible hand that moved inspections away, lowered scrutiny, and made humanitarian exemptions into a weapon. Honest officers stared at screens showing their own patrol routes being used to guide convoys around them. One veteran agent reportedly removed his badge and placed it on the table without speaking, because when you realize your oath has been converted into a tool for someone else's profit, words don't come easily. Arrests followed quietly. Badges surrendered, credentials revoked. No press conferences, no dramatic perp walks, because this part was too sensitive, too reputationally dangerous, too corrosive to public trust to be consumed like entertainment. And yet here you are, listening, because the story isn't really about the yacht at all. It's about how systems can be turned. Late that night, analysts decrypted the final folder inside Project Titaline. Phase Horizon, a 10-year plan to restructure coastal oversight permanently. Oversight outsourced, inspections automated, humanitarian exemptions expanded until scrutiny became politically impossible, enforcement reduced to ceremony, and the final realization landed with the weight of inevitability. This was not infiltration, it was replacement, a plan to build a world where the network didn't have to hide because hiding would be optional. As midnight passed, the yacht sat empty at a secure dock, the children relocated to federal care facilities, medical staff working silently, no cameras, no statements, and somewhere in a sealed room someone summarized it off record. Power doesn't always come with violence. Sometimes it comes with patience, paperwork, and silence. Any system that stops auditing itself becomes a weapon for the first ruthless mind that learns how to drive it. And if you're still listening, tap like so this story reaches more people. Comment expose if you believe systems should never operate in the dark.